We went this week to Pine Cove, as I said, and it was, I think, Tuesday afternoon. They have what is called the adult pool party. That sounds fun and exciting, but it's typically a time where Liza and I just jump from table to table or couple to couple and family to family and hear their stories as we're there to serve. All of our family, all four of us, we go to serve and hear their stories and try to give them good counsel, pray for them. A lot of it in years past has been marriage advice, parenting counsel, etc. Well, this Tuesday, I met with some families. We talked about church hurt. We talked about different things going on in churches, and that was fun. Heavy, but fun. And then I found myself around a table of male counselors, and that got really interesting, okay? They were like, do you mind if we ask you some questions? And so you get young guys in their, 20s, early 20s, 18, 19, 20, 21. They're in love with Jesus. They're passionate about the Bible. They're discovering theology. They've got the greatest questions. Some of them are like, what? What books have you been reading? Okay, put that down. Let me give you another book to pick up. Some of them are really vulnerable. And this one counselor at Pine Cove, if you don't know anything about Pine Cove, it's one of the great of many camping systems, Christian camping systems in this area. And they do a lot of things unique, but one of the things they do is they give their camp counselors a nickname. So I wouldn't go by Scott, I would go by something like Flopsy or something like that, based on whatever story. I have no idea what that means. Don't read into that. But you go before your thing and you tell a story about yourself or an embarrassing story or whatever, and then the rest of the counselors give you a name, and that becomes your name. And then all week long, you go by that name, and then at the very end of the week, you reveal your real name to all of your campers and the kids, and it's a big thing. So I was sitting with kind of a quirky, skinny kid that reminded me of me. His name was McSprite. I have no idea where that comes from or why he had that name. But he was sitting there, and he was watching me, and we were eating tacos together around the pool. All these other guys were asking questions, and this is his question. He said, do you mind if I ask a question? I said, sure. And he looked at me. He almost had tears in his eyes. The mood changed immediately. And he said, Mr. Scott, I have a problem with big churches. And I was like, oh, what's your problem with big churches? He goes, I feel like when I'm in a room of many people and we're worshiping and praying, that my voice and my prayer gets lost and God doesn't hear it because there's so many people praying. And so I'm not a fan of big churches because I don't feel like God kind of pays attention to me. And I just took a breath for a moment and I was like, wow, it was a totally different question than all the others, right? And so I looked at him and I asked his real name, and he said, my real name is Reese. And I said, I'd like to call you Reese, if that's okay. And he kind of whispered it so nobody else could hear it. And I began to say, Reese, thank you for sharing that. And then we began to talk about his heart, not the size of the church, not how many people are in the room or how many people are praying, but the way that his heart views the Father, and how his view of the Father was a bit too much like us. Like we have limited attention and we have our limited capacity to hear and to do things. And I just began to comfort and I think hopefully gently challenge him that the Father is not like us in that he can only hear or can only do or can only take in so many things. And he got really quiet and he said, thank you. Thank you. And we saw each other a little bit during the week after that. I wonder if you struggle with something around the question why. Do you live in a place where why is the dominant question in the air? Big, huge question mark. Why? Why was I born this way? Why is this the story of my life? Why did that marriage fail? Why haven't I been able to get married yet? Why haven't I ever felt like I've been able to express my dreams and gifts? Why? Why is this? Why does my best friend have a chronic disease? Why we haven't been able to have children? Why? The big question of why can hang over so many people like a cloud their whole life. And what I'd like to talk to you about today as we talk about John again and Jesus according to John is that. And what I'd like to do is invite you to take a step on a long journey. It could take a long time. But take a step on the journey from why to a better question. From the question why, which is not a bad question, it just can tend to be a very heavy question. It can sometimes be a crushing question. Why has my son, why has my daughter left us? Why have they changed their values? Why can't I get a job in the field? Why? All these big why, they can crush. Sometimes, again, it's the right question. It's not necessarily inherently a bad question. But I'd like to invite you to take a step from why to a better question. It's a more biblical question. It sounds strange up front, but it's the question, how long? It's the question, how long? I'd like to take a step together, or at least invite you to take a step on the long journey from why to how long. And I'll show you this in the Gospel of John. If you've got your Bibles, we'll be in John chapter 9. And buckle up because we're going to do the whole chapter because it's one story. It's just repeated several times. And it's the story of another great miracle of Jesus. And shocker, like chapter 5, if you've been tracking with us through the gospel, when John was telling us about Jesus' story, you know, the first 4 chapters of John, we're tracking along, and everything's kind of hunky-dory. He's like, everything's good. I'm doing this and doing that. I'm calling disciples. I'm talking to the woman at the well in Samaria, even though that's controversial. It doesn't get him into trouble. But then chapter 5, he happens to heal a dude, remember, lame for 38 years, but it happens to be on a Saturday. Happens to be on a Sabbath, and because the guy picks up his mat and walks, he gets in real big trouble. And the Pharisees decide that they must kill Jesus from that point on, chapter 5. We've been through chapter 6, the feeding of the 5,000, the water walk, and then all of the people tracking him down, looking for more food, and the conversation about all of that. Chapter 7 starts the Feast of Tabernacles. Are you thirsty? If you're thirsty, come to me and drink deeply of what I came to offer you, and rivers of living water will bubble up from within, he says. In the end of chapter 7 and into chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery, and then light of the world passage that we saw last week and ending that. And now chapter 9, he leaves this context, this light, dark, thirsty water context, and he's walking from the temple, and he passes a dude who's been blind his entire life. And so, shocker, spoiler, Jesus heals him, but guess what day of the week it is? Wah, wah, wah. Again, a Saturday. And because of the way he heals him, the Pharisees, who were always there, they get in all up in sorts again. But the real question that's asked at the beginning from the disciples is, I think, really, really important. Let's talk about it, and we'll stop and go as we go along. John chapter 9. If you've got your Bibles, you can look just one verse up in verse 59 of chapter 8. Therefore they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. That's how chapter 8 ends, right? Because he has the biggest rebuke because he tells them, you're like your father, not God, but the devil. Whoa, biggest rebuke. And then the biggest mic drop, before Abraham was, I am. They understand that as a claim to deity, which it was. And they picked up stones to stone him because that was blasphemy. Yet it wasn't his time. It wasn't his hour. And so he, I think by the grace of the Father, slips through and gets caught into the crowd again. And so chapter 1 of verse 9, it is meant to continue right along. Look at verse 1. As he passed by, as he was walking from the temple, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? You see the question, they don't use the word, but the question is why? Why is this man blind? Why? He was born that way. Let's pause and just note that in our day, thank God, by his grace, and for a long time, people who are not sighted, who do not have the gift of sight, have many, many opportunities. Braille has been invented. All manner of things have been invented to help individuals with this disability. And we're so grateful for that. But let's rewind in time to the time of Jesus and consider that if you were blind at the time of Jesus, you have no prospect of getting married, therefore no prospect of children. You have no prospect of meaningful work. There is a social outcast system that you fit into the middle of in almost every way. Save the great benefactor work of grace and mercy from someone in your life, chances are really good that your entire life is awful and you are begging for money just to be able to put food in your belly. This is very likely this man's story from the time that he reached adulthood, perhaps even earlier, because families who had a child with this sort of disability, there was often shame associated with it, bad theology and mythology, like the disciples are asking. Perhaps his parents sinned that he was born blind. And so if something happened like this, there was lots of people, again, kind of like Job's friends, they would look with people with children with disabilities with a bit of a side glance. God must not like you. You must have done something wrong, etc. All false theology. But this man's situation is dire. And the disciples are asking why. And they assume something. They assume something, again, that sounds a lot like Job's friends. And that's this kind of theology. God always blesses the righteous, and God always curses the wicked. That's the way it always happens. So we can tell by somebody's life if they're righteous or wicked. So if they look cursed, and this guy's blind from birth, what else conclusion can you come to? So he must be wicked. So it's either his sin or his parents' sin that has caused this. That's the assumption. Big question is why, but they're filling it with an assumption. And Jesus comes in and says, no, full stop, break, record scratch, no, stop. No, that's not the way the world works. Birth defects, disabilities from birth are not a record of sin in the parents or sin in the individual. It is from a different category of just a fallenness, cursed world because of sin in the earth that gets in genes and makes hurricanes fly into cities. That's what we're talking about. And so Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents. You are wrong about that. No. But it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Again, this light and dark sort of contrast and theme that he's going. When he had said this, now it's where it gets interesting. Jesus spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle. You didn't wake up this morning thinking you're going to hear the word spittle in church. But here we are. You hear it multiple times. He spat on the ground. Can you imagine the blind guy? He's probably sitting, and people are coming by, and you hear Jesus talking to his disciples, and he's sitting on the ground, just holding out his hands, asking something, can't see anything. And forgive me, but the next thing he hears is, you're like, what? What is that? And then something action, and then you feel warm clay on your eyes. You're like, who is doing this? What is happening? I imagine the guy was super confused, okay? I wish we had more time because it's really beautiful. There's a long history and some sort of Jewish culture behind the idea of spit. Jesus does this in the Gospel of Mark as well in a different story. When he said this, Jesus spat on the ground, made clay of the spittle, and applied the clay to his eyes, and then said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And John gives us in his reader's translation, which translated means sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. Let's just focus on that for a second. So he went away and washed, and he came back seeing. Where they are in the temple, in the pool of Siloam, if you remember from about a month ago when we did the thirsty sermon, is quite a trek. It probably would have taken him blind by himself. Maybe he had a guide. Maybe he knew his way. Maybe he counted his steps and felt the walls here, and he knew what gap that was, and he went to the next gap. Perhaps, as unsighted people do, they have incredible sense of memory of space. They memorize the steps between this point and that point. Maybe he knew, but he walked all the way down there, washed off in a large pool, which is all the way down at the tip of the southern end of Mount Zion, the city of David, where the king's palace and everything was. And as he's washing off the mud, I don't know what he first sees, the sparkle of the sun on the surface of the pool water. And he's like, wait, what's that? He had never seen anything before. He's blind from birth. He doesn't know what the color blue is. So when people describe water as being blue, he has no concept of that. Blue versus red versus black versus white doesn't matter. He's never seen anything. He's never seen the sun. He's never seen the face of his mother. He's never seen his own reflection. Doesn't know what a fingernail looks like. Anything. And all of a sudden, his eyes begin to open and sight begins to come to him. And this is a miraculous thing. Except the problem is, of course, it's a Saturday and Jesus did work. He made clay. He spit on the ground and made clay. Therefore, like chapter 5, he must be destroyed. He must be destroyed because he's challenging the sign of the Mosaic covenant, and Moses is our rabbi. He's the greatest priest, prophet, and even some people refer to him as a king. He was their number one person, the Mosaic law. And Jesus is coming, especially in the Gospel of John, saying, I'm like Moses. I'm coming in to do the things of Moses, but greater. So, verse 8, therefore, the neighbors and those who had previously saw him as a beggar were saying, is this not the one who used to sit and beg? And others were saying, this is he. And still others saying, no, someone looked like him. But he kept saying, it's me. I'm the one. This is a great day for me, by the way. And notice that the story of this man's healing gets lost, gets completely lost in the silly drama and conflict that the Pharisees bring in. This is where we're going to end, by the way. We're going to end focusing on the spiritual arrogance of the Pharisees that so blind them to the person and work of Jesus, the identity of the Messiah before him, but also blind them to compassion for a beggar who does not have to be a beggar anymore. Do you understand? This man can now open up all of the things about his life that you and I long to do. Get a job, learn a skill, maybe fall in love with a woman, maybe get married and have children and grandchildren and actually own a home, maybe some property that he can inherit to his children and grandchildren. Now, all of that is available to him because he met Jesus, whom he doesn't seem to know much about, and his sight comes back. This man's life is dramatically changed. I am the one, he says, verse 10. So they were saying to him, how then were your eyes open? And he answered, the man who's called Jesus made clay, anointed my eyes, and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. And so I went away and washed and received sight. And they said to him, where is he? And he said, I don't know. So he knows his name. This is really there's a lot of humor in here. It's okay to laugh because I laugh. There's a lot of humor in here because what we're going to see is, again, the spiritual arrogance of the Pharisees, but we're also going to see, and pay attention to this, the great boldness of this man, the formerly blind man. And here's the irony. Here's the irony. Can you see it? I want you to see a man here dressed as a beggar in rags, again, because everything in his life is the benefit and compassion of somebody else. And he's standing opposite of a group of well-dressed Pharisees. Maybe there's 10 of them, okay? You see 10 men well-dressed. Young man, I don't know how old he is, it doesn't say. Let's say in his mid-30s, the beginning of his life, dressed in rags. Who is blind now and who can see? That's the irony. That's the irony. There was once a man who was blind, but now he could see. And there's a group of well-dressed men that think they can see, but are actually blind. Here's the drama of the story. This man knows it, and he's brand new. He doesn't even have faith in Jesus yet. That's coming in a second. But he was healed by Jesus, and he's really interested. And he begins to teach these men who are teachers but can't learn. The irony is thick. Okay, look, verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind. Now it was a Sabbath on the day when Jesus made clay and opened his eyes. Well, we saw that coming, didn't we? Okay, verse 15. Then the Pharisees were also asking him again how he received his sight. And he said, he applied clay to my eyes and I washed and I see. I've told you this several times. Therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. But others were saying, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind man again, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? And he said, guess he's a prophet. Which is partly true, I guess, but not fully there. Verse 18. Then the Jews then did not believe it of him that he had been blind and received sight until they called the parents of the very one who had received his sight and questioned them, saying, is this your son? Who you say was born blind? Who you say was born blind? They're like lawyers. Produce some evidence, please. Do you have a walking cane when he was 7? Do you have a walking cane when he was 12? I'd like to see the progression. You sure this was your son? Is this your son you say was born blind? How does he now see? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son. It's just kind of funny. I'm sorry. There's a mom and a dad here like, yeah, that's him. Yeah. I've been taking care of him his whole life. Yeah, I get it. You see the dad like, really? The mom's kind of excited. I don't know. Yeah, this is our son. Okay. His parents answered, yeah, we know this is our son and that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we don't know. Or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. Now, but this is not just ignorance. This is fear. Watch. Look at verse 22. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed Jesus to be the Christ, he was going to be put out of the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, he's of age, ask him. Now, here's what's at stake. The synagogue. For us, it's maybe similar to this engagement expression of a church. Now, they would have had a building, very simple building, probably 2 stories at one point, at one part of the building with a courtyard, often with a tree, with different elements of it. There was a place where they kept the scrolls that they read during the sort of the service of the synagogue. There was a chair for the rabbi to sit on when he taught, etc. We could pick this up. Now, the history of the synagogue is really wild. We don't really know how and when it began, but we know around the time it began. And that's after the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586, and the whole nation of Israel went into exile in Babylon. They didn't have a temple. They couldn't offer sacrifices. And so they began slowly to create a gathering place, which is essentially what synagogue means, and gather, read the scriptures, encourage each other, pray, and instead of offering sacrifices, which they couldn't do, they offered the sacrifice of praise. They offered the sacrifice of a repentant heart. They offered the sacrifice of prayer. And so the synagogue was born, and when the Jews came back into the land and rebuilt the temple, under Zechariah and Haggai and Zerubbabel and Shealtiel, all of that around 516, they continued to plant and build synagogues. So now they had a small temple and they continue to have synagogues. And now, of course, the synagogues are alive in Jesus' day. So to be put out of the synagogue is not the end of your religious life, but it is a massive deal. It's to be excommunicated from your believing community. It's a massive thing. Very, very shameful, too, for someone to be put out. And so the parents are like, we know that you're going to put us out if we say that Jesus is the Christ, so we're not going to even get close to that. You ask him, he's of age. If he gets in trouble, he gets in trouble. Verse 24. So a second time they called the man. We have no idea. This is wild. We have no idea how long this took. It may have been actually over several days. The second time they called the man who had been born blind and said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man," Jesus they're talking about, "is a sinner." He then answered the man who was formerly blind, "Whether he is a sinner, I don't know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." That sounds like a hymn, doesn't it? We borrowed the words of this man. See how bold he is? He's going to get even bolder. So they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I have told you already, multiple times. You've written it down. And you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again?" Here it goes. "You don't want to become his disciples too, do you?" I love it. Come on. This man is so bold. And he's not even a believer in him yet. He recognizes him as a rabbi, as a prophet, and it sure seems like he's interested in following this man. I think you and I would be too, if the man gave you sight for the very first time. You don't want to be his disciples too, do you? And then they get really upset. They reviled him and said, "You are his disciple. We are the disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as far as this man, we don't know where he's from." And the man comes back and says again, "Well, here's an amazing thing, that you don't know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes." I love this man. I want to meet him in heaven one day, and I want to sit down in the corner for a very long time and say, "Run me through it again. Run me through it again." Because he's got a boldness, doesn't he? He's got a great boldness. Here's the amazing thing. You don't know where he's come from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not hear sinners, but if any, again, a little bad theology there, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears him. Since the beginning of time has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Now watch, they answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you teaching us?" And look at the last phrase. So they put him out. Now, what is that talking about? The synagogue. They put him out of the synagogue. They said, "Here's your punishment." He didn't even confess Jesus to be the Christ because he doesn't know him yet. He doesn't know anything about it. But they're like, "We can't live with this." You know what the early church did? Best we can tell, starting around the 2nd or 3rd century. When people would come to faith in Jesus, they would disciple them. And before they were baptized, remember this context has water in it, both the spittle and the pool. There's water involved in this miracle. The church would question, not interrogate, but compassionately and gently question the new believer. "Tell me what you think about Jesus. Tell me what he has done in your life. Tell me this, tell me that. What would you say if this? What would you say if that?" This became an early form of discipleship for new believers, and it was based on, best we can tell in church history, the story of this man and how incredibly bold he was in the face of the persecuting Pharisees and scribes who were trying to punish him, eventually did punish him, trying to question him, pinch him into a scenario so that they could put more pressure on Jesus and eventually punish him, which they did. I love that. I wonder how you might react and respond if you were put under the same pressure. I wonder if that's true for you. If you're a teacher and some of your teachers come, "Hey, you wear like Christian shirts and you got verses behind your desk and stuff. You're a church person?" You're like, "Yeah, I'm a church person. I'm a follower of Jesus." And then they start asking you some questions. I know that can be a very tense. I'm a pastor. I've been doing this professionally for 30 years. And when people ask me that question, still my stomach gets a little tight. I'm like, "Ooh, this is one of those moments." Okay. I want to be winsome. I want to be true. I want to be compassionate. I definitely don't want to start making up answers on the spot and waxing eloquent. I don't want to try to impress them or anything. I'm like, okay, this is a beautiful moment. How do you handle that? Do you shy away from those? Do you lean into those? These are some beautiful moments. And that's what followers of Jesus are called to do. They're called to represent their master as other people ask questions. I think this guy, again, I wish we knew his name. This guy is a role model in so many beautiful ways. The way he responds to this is amazing. But of course, the end, they put him out. Now, if you didn't know the story, if you don't read ahead, you would say, how would Jesus respond to the religious leaders putting this guy out? What do you think would happen? Look at the next verse, verse 35. Jesus heard that they had put him out and went and found him. I love that. If this is the Feast of Tabernacles, there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the temple area, moving, coming, and going. This is not simple. The simple fact, Jesus heard that they had put him out and finding him. That's a monumental little moment. This is the one sheep leaving the 99 and the shepherd leaving the 99 and going to find the one. This is very, very similar to that. Don't miss over the really beautiful idea that Jesus heard because of what Jesus did. Again, this guy didn't ask for it. He's not a believer in Jesus yet. Jesus did this. He told his disciples in order that the glory of God might be seen. So Jesus heard and then finds him. He said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said, you have both seen, and don't miss that word. I was reading this and I circled it, underlined it. I'm like, if he's still blind, obviously that punches you in the gut, right? But now he's seeing. He's formerly blind, not blind anymore. You have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking to you. He said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him, which is proper. This is the point of faith and salvation. And Jesus said, for judgment I came into the world. Now the irony is called out, so that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Guy over here dressed in rags who couldn't see, he says, I've come for judgment to make people like this able to see. And I'm speaking in parables. I'm come and calling out spiritual arrogance. This is my job. This is why the Father has sent me, so that these 10 men, expertly dressed, who think they know everything, actually recognize their blindness. Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said, we're not blind too, are we? They can tell that he's talking to them. And Jesus said, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say we see, your sin remains. Spiritual arrogance is a wildly difficult weed to pull out of the garden. It's a wildly difficult weed to pull out of the garden. Once it gets its roots, it begins to wind itself around everything and mask itself like something that bears fruit, spiritual arrogance. What's difficult about it is it's easy to see in others, really difficult to see in the mirror. Easy to see in others when you get the ick on someone who's just flaunting, I don't know, their biblical knowledge, their role in the church, their title, their education, whatever it is. And you're like, I don't know what it is about him, but that just doesn't feel a lot like how Jesus would probably do it. Get a little bit of the ick. It's like the spiritual arrogance of this person is leaking out. They want the spotlight. They want the stage. They want the attention. They got to be in the center all the time. Spiritual arrogance is very, very dangerous. And we see this in the disciples. The reality is, you can be blind in a way, and God brings light to you. This is this great story. And you can think that you see, but still be in darkness. The irony of these two groups is pretty fantastic. But why? The big question as we start, the big question perhaps over this man's life. We don't know. Maybe, I don't know if anybody has ever tracked this because, again, he's anonymous. And the time between when this is written and the time when we start to hear really traceable stories about the church is pretty wide. This is early. As I said several months ago, I think this book is written early by John. But perhaps this guy, we don't know. Again, that's why I want to find him in the kingdom and sit down and say, tell me the story, mate. Okay? Maybe this guy becomes a leader in the church. Maybe this guy becomes an evangelist. Maybe this guy becomes a missionary. Maybe this guy starts a whole new thing over here because of his faith, because of his new sight. I have no idea, and I love that. But the question why that hung over him in the beginning can get to over time, and this is what I'd like you and I to do, start taking steps to the question, how long? Now, what is that question about? I'm going to read you a passage from Psalm 13. Just read it to you. It's not on the screen. I just want you to hear it. Here's the boldness of David to say, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long, O Lord, will you hide your face from me? How long will I take counsel in my own soul, sorrow in my heart all the day? How long will my enemy be exalted over me?" There's a real big difference theologically and in faith between the question why and how long. And here's what David and many of the others in the Old Testament and New Testament teach us. Why is this free-floating question? It's not tethered to really anything. It's the most simple question, but also can be some of the most dangerous and heavy questions. How long is a question that's tethered to faith, that's tethered to purpose and intention. So when David says, how long, he's saying, I have this connection to you, Father. I have this connection to you, God. And I'm asking a question in the middle and in that connection. Now, the question I ask behind it can be brutally honest and even wrong in its understanding. But when I ask it in faith and I direct it to you, God, it can be really beautiful. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? Now, here's what we know about God's ability to forget. He doesn't have it. God cannot forget something. He cannot not see something. But David feels this way. David feels this way, and so instead of saying, which he could have easily said, why have you forgotten me? What he does, and I think it's really important, he says, how long will you forget me? There's the reality of the way that I feel, but the question is very different. How long has an end point in mind, doesn't it? That's the point of how long will it be until this turns and changes? How long will it be until I feel your gaze again? How long will it be until I sense your nearness to me? Because right now it feels like you've forgotten me. It's a very different question. It's a question of faith and a question of purpose. It's a question from inside an intimate relationship. So if you're asking the question why right now, I understand. I've been there. I'm still there often. Why? Huge question. Sometimes it's the perfectly appropriate question. But when why is attached to something really painful, to something really hard to understand, it can begin to crush you over time. And if that's happening to you, I would invite you to take a small step, even today, a small step, and replace why in your prayers, in your mind, in your self-talk. Replace that with a different question. How long? 2 Corinthians chapter 12 is one of the passages that have been really, really powerful for our family through Liza's struggle with chronic pain, active cerebral spinal fluid leak in her head, which causes, in technical medical terms, intracranial hypotension, a low pressure system in her head after 3 brain surgeries and all kinds of other things. Been 10, 11 years in this current state. First surgery was in 2007. And we as a family have asked a long time, why? Why? This congenital disease, no one gave it to her. It's not a result of sin. It's not a punishment from God. Why? Why did she have that? Why did the surgeries go that way? Why is she still in the place that she is in? But at some point, we as a family began to take some steps towards how long. And I got to tell you, it has made all the difference in the world. All the difference in the world. Such that Liza is beginning to see the way that God is redeeming her battle with chronic pain and helping her have ministries in the lives of others. Just this week at family camp, getting to sit and cry with mothers and wives who are struggling with chronic pain. And now all of a sudden, Liza's pain has become a passport into the hearts and lives of other people who have the same difficulty. And in seeing that, she begins to see some redemption. And so this prayer that we've prayed, how long, Father, until we begin to see the other side of it? That's a small answer to the prayer. This is why the glory of God will be seen in this. At the beginning, Jesus passed by and sees a man born blind, and his disciples say, is it he the sinner, or is parents the sinner that caused this? He says, no, neither. But it's so that the glory of God may be seen in him. So the glory of God may be seen in him. There's a big difference between why and how long. 2 Corinthians 12 has been important for us because in it, Paul says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations that I've received, I was caught up to the third heaven and saw things and heard things that humans are not supposed to hear, right? And that would cause me to boast. And even if I did, it would be true, but I'm trying not to boast. I'm trying to refrain it. And because of that, to keep me from exalting myself, God gave me a thorn in the flesh, a tormentor, messenger of Satan. It actually doesn't say God gave it. It was given to me. And I implored the Lord 3 times, he says, to take it away. His implicit answer was no. And sometimes that's God's answer, at least in the moment. Sometimes his answer is a silent no. And then Paul says, but he has said to me, God spoke to him, but he has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected. My power is perfected in weakness. That's why Paul says, so now, instead of boasting in my resume and all the things that I've accomplished, I boast in my weaknesses. I boast in my weaknesses because in those spaces is where God's power is perfected, where the glory is brighter. And now, this man didn't know it. This man born blind, maybe he lived 20, 30 years, however it was, but he didn't know that those 20 years of pain and all the pain of his parents, those 20 long years, 30 long years, however it was going to be just the first chapter of a much longer story. And at the beginning of chapter 2, he's going to meet a dude named Jesus who spits on the ground and then puts it on his face. How weird of a story. And he's like, really? Seriously? A dude spit on me, and he's walking, feeling himself down, washes himself in the water, and all of a sudden begins to see the light reflect off the water and say, what has happened? And his whole life is different. And even though he gets put out of the man-made synagogue community, the Savior of the world finds him and calls him to faith by revealing himself to him. And now he is not part of a synagogue, see the irony? But he is part of a family that's eternal. He was blind, but now he can see, and he's been persecuted by people who can see but are really blind. They put him out of a community, and the same moment that he's put out of a community, he becomes a part of an eternal family, and he's adopted as a son. This beautiful story is what is the story that God is weaving in you right now. We just can't see it. We haven't crossed the threshold to be able to see it. We don't know what glory is coming next. And so why feels appropriate because we're stuck. But if we change that to how long, it pulls us forward a little bit. We begin to walk in it, and we begin to walk with God in it, and we go, okay, this is not the way it's always going to be. Nothing that is not eternal will last forever. Yeah, there's that fridge magnet for you. Nothing that is not eternal will last forever. That means that everything that's not eternal is going to end at some point. Your pain, your struggle, your striving, your difficulty. None of that is eternal because we've seen the end of the book. And so if it's not eternal, it's going to end. And so the most appropriate prayer is, how long, Father? How long? How long until we crest the hill? How long until we turn the corner? How long until you begin to see, even if the answer continues to be no, as it was in Paul, even if it continues to be no, how long until I begin to see the beauty of your grace and your power made perfect in my weakness? That's the story that he's writing. That's the story that I want to chase together as a family. And I'm so excited. I pray that God lets me do it with you for 50 years. It would be amazing. However long it is, it's going to be beautiful together. And we're going to walk this how long road together. And it's going to be amazing.